Yes. As someone from my generation and also born in Germany, but then born to quite left-leaning parents who also kind of have an internationalization perspective really early on. And my mother, for example, studied in the UK, and so we grew up in a very Anglophile household. And that was kind of imbued in us through upbringing, but then also through my own biography. So I left Germany when I was 16, then went to school in the UK, studied there, then went on to always via the university system essentially, so that's closely intertwined, that different degrees took me to different countries, then studied in Finland, and then came back to Germany and then Belgium and Netherlands. So I think through those personal journeys, obviously, but even before that, I think as a kind of mindset and as an idea that is also closely bound up, I think, in at least some narratives for what it means to be German, which of course in itself, after the Second World War, had a strong narrative in terms of integration into Europe, and through that reconciliation and taming nationalism and so on. So probably a variety of reasons to do with historical narratives, personal experiences and upbringing. Yeah, I always remember that one moment, which was not only about Europe, but it was also about noticing that there is Europe as an actor, so not just as an idea and as countries and as places to go and study or visit. And that's something that also was still a formative moment for then Europe and the issue of peace and security, was watching for the first time a live debate of the European Parliament, must have been 11 or 12, where effectively the parliamentarians very emotionally debated the inaction of Europe towards the wars in the Balkans, or the ethnic cleansing that was going on and the genocide in the Balkans. And so I was asking my parents, so what is this? Who are these parliamentarians? Yes, this is the European Parliament, and they are debating now about blue helmets. So it also it was linked to globalism, so the UN's failure and the EU's outrage, or some people that seem to represent Europe, i.e. members of the European Parliament. And that got me thinking, and I mean, both, of course, the tragedy of the violence and atrocities there, but also the fact that there is something more than just the inactive national parliaments. So there is another dimension to politics, and that thing is the European Parliament, which I was not aware of before that. And that is also passionately involved in trying to solve peace and security issues. So that, I think, the typical thing would be, okay, German unification and so on and so forth, and all the discussions surrounding that. But I mean, if I really had to think about, okay, when did I first really notice that there is something like a European also actorness, and it was that. Yeah, it has to be the Brexit referendum, I think. I mean, I was up all night. So, rather than following the media, as in the case of the formative experience, and seeing some pro-activism, however desperate it was with the parliament back then, now it was having to listen and really realizing around, I don't know, it was 2 o'clock or something, 3 o'clock, when I realized that the vote really went to leave, and having been socialized in the UK and then owing a lot to the UK and knowing that there was always a special approach of British view of the European Union, it was nonetheless a shock. And I think it is also a symbol of something more systematic. I mean, the unraveling of a lot of the fabric of society, international order, the kind of void we steer into now in terms of populism, but also, to be honest, some kind of dissatisfaction with the European project, whether it's rightly or wrongly, so either through arguments that show a bit more ignorance and misunderstanding of the European project, or right arguments that show very much where the problems lie in terms of satisfying basic citizen needs and inspiring citizens and so on and so forth. So definitely Brexit in that way, there were a variety of failures in EU foreign policy that I think are also terrible. I think the migration crisis is something that is fundamentally worrying because of the fact that the EU loses all its credibility in terms of a humane policy. So, the entire even if it was never true, but the entire normative power EU image is now completely unupholdable. But for the long-term structural consequences of the European project, yeah, of course, the departure of the UK and the entire haggling that comes with it is deeply worrying, and of course also a sign of the need for de-integration theories right now. Now, I mean, this is the general problem now, isn't it, with the EU, that it's very difficult, as you can see, trying to find a isolated case where you can say, well, this is a major breakthrough that, as much as, you know, Brexit is a negative example, but I mean, the positive aspect for the EU is that despite all criticism and right criticisms, I mean, things carry on. The Union adapts. One can also see some positive aspects of how the remaining member states are dealing now with Brexit. A new exciting era now starts with female commissioner, with maybe a new energy now after or faced with all the challenges. But a kind of iconic, positive moment that I can't think of right now. Freedom of movement, that's for sure, and has opened up a variety of educational opportunities. It has been a fascinating object of studying, so I also think I'm also grateful to it in terms of my career, being able to focus on it. And I think the ability to have a second identity, I think that is really not to be underestimated. So that there is something where you're not just bound by your national limitations, that you can feel an additional layer of European. I am realistic enough that my dreams of federalism are not going to be fully realized by then, but really tackling or completing at least the major fields that have been, half-heartedly started, but then halfway through stopped, and thus, compromised in many ways. So, completion of European economic integration, that also would mean, a kind of Ministry of Finance. Hopefully, many of the plans that Macron put forward, that there will be a German-Franco agreement at some point, and that a clear, collective, and integrated asylum policy and refugee policy will be achieved in line with all the, EU but also UN obligations. And a foreign policy that is a little bit less ad hoc, that is again a bit like in the 70s, where there was a call for a third way between two major poles, that now the EU has to find a kind of European way. Those three areas, I think. And then a lot can be done on advancing. But I think some of the positive developments now, the new activism on the climate crisis, for example, a kind of new organization of constructive protests. So all of these things that are quite optimistic signals in terms of a revival of democracy, even that the EU can. I mean, it's always a difficult position because it's never seen as anything else but a very bureaucratic and removed institution very often, but I think it has lots of tools to support and facilitate a revival of democratic movements. So if there's a bit more creativity and emphasis placed on that, that'd be great. And of course, hopefully a kind of pushback and normalization of this kind of anti-liberal developments right now across the nation states of the EU.